engineering degree. So that training is a lot of mechanical, structural, some electrical, systems engineering. And then I went to law school. And as you mentioned, so then I went to law school after that, and became a patent lawyer, as you mentioned in your nice introduction. And I've been practicing now in this field of mechanical and electromechanical space. Oh, it looks wonderful, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you so much. For about 15 years, and the last 5 years or so, we've had more and more clients, innovating in this space. We've seen invention disclosures, which are forms that they use to complete the description of their innovation, include additive manufacturing. And so we started learning more about it. And then more and more of our clients wanted to protect their innovations related to 3D printing. So I am the chair of our 3D printing task force at our firm. And I have had the opportunity to work with our great group. And we've been fortunate to write and speak in this space and just to help our clients get the protection they deserve. So that's generally how I got into it. And again, like I said, I'm just thrilled to be here today. So thanks for your time. And again, to the group, I apologize for my technical difficulties, but thank you for your help.
Okay, we're queued up, so I'm going to give you the floor, and I can't wait to hear what you are presenting for us.
Thank you so much. And now let's see, how do I go to the next slide?
Just give Sarah a cue and say next slide.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Oh, thank you so much. All right, so here's our first slide. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about two key things during today's talk. The first is things to be thinking about for protecting your 3D printing related innovations. And then the second part is increasing diversity and innovation and how we can do that within our organizations, within our teams, and within the industry work that we do. So next slide, please. So why patents? All of you are doing this amazing work within the 3D printing space. Why patents? Why should we be thinking about that? Well, I can tell you from a statistical analysis that 3D printing is one of the top 3 fastest growing areas in which patent applicants seek U.S. patent protection. And we're seeing those same numbers in the European Patent Office as well. So there's been a significant rise in U.S. published patent applications with published 18 months after filing in additive manufacturing sector from 2014 to 2019. And it's both per year and over a 5-year period. We're seeing about a 30% increase. The market for 3D printing continues to grow, as many of you, I'm sure, very well known. Some of this relates to in terms of the patent side and why there's innovation in this area. Superior machines, there's been improvements to the printing materials, lower costs. And one of the key things from the patent standpoint, from a patent attorney side, is that patents covering a lot of this core 3D printing tech have expired. So this has allowed others to use that technology that was otherwise covered by one or more claims of a patent and use it to further improve or add to the innovation in that area. And I think that has a lot to do with this increase in the filings. So lastly, when you look at the data, because of these filings, worldwide and certainly in the US, this overall economic impact will reach upwards of 100 billion by 2025. So analysts are anticipating that. And so this could be certainly one way to increase the value of the great work that you're doing in 3D printing. Next slide, please. So the benefits of patents. So as I mentioned, I've been working in this area for a long time. I've been fortunate to learn many, many different amazing technologies, cutting edge technologies, and help a wealth of different types of clients. And I've seen again and again the benefits of patents to a client, to their portfolio, to their business, whether it's a startup, whether it's a Fortune 100, a university client. I have the opportunity to represent all different types of clients and seen the benefits across the board. So one of the first things is it deprives competitors of these leading technologies. It creates a barrier to market entry. So if you have 1 or 2 patents, or sometimes we call it your patent family or a portfolio, and one of your competitors sees 1 or more patents, they're aware of it, and it may make them pause before they enter that market and think about, if I enter it, am I going to be infringing 1 or more claims to that patent? And it can create, some hesitation at least from your competitors, or make them potentially even design around a product or a system that they're innovating. A patent's an asset. It can be valued, borrowed against, depreciated. It can generate revenue. It could be part of a license or sold. It certainly can be a bargaining chip if you are charged with patent infringement. You can say, we've got this patent that covers this area of innovation in 3D printing, and you might have a situation where you can cross-license that technology. It fosters a reputation as a leader or innovator in this space. It's easier to enforce than other forms of intellectual property because a patent, a US patent, is presumed valid. So it's a pretty high standard of validity. And lastly, it promotes an internal climate for innovation and a morale boost for employees. When they're rewarded for their success and hard work in innovating in a certain area, it's certainly a morale boost, and again, creates value for that employee and also for your organization. Next slide, please. So types of US patents, just briefly, there's a utility and there's a design, and innovations in 3D printing can be covered by both of these types. The utility, as I have mentioned here, protects the functional aspects of your invention, of your innovation. There's a provisional application and a non-provisional that I'll talk about. And then also design patent is different than the functional aspects of your invention, but protects the visual appearance. And I think this is particularly relevant and something to consider in the 3D printing realm, because we know that the 3D printers have enabled this printing of very, very fine details that can add to a design that may not be present with, or at least much more difficult to achieve with regular manufacturing means. So those types of fine lines or fine designs could be the subject of a design patent that may be worth considering for your business. Next slide, please. So protecting innovations with the U.S. utility patent. When we're talking the U.S. utility, which is protecting the functional aspects of your innovations, if you file and you obtain a patent, a U.S. patent, you have the right to exclude others from making, using, selling, and importing, the product, the process that's covered by one or more claims of that patent. The term is 20 years from the date of filing. It's limited throughout the United States in terms of how you can enforce it. And it's, of course, enforceable through our federal courts. Next slide, please. Briefly, just this process to give you a little bit of an overview. If you think you have something, and we'll talk about the requirements for a patent in a moment, but if you think you have something that may be patentable, or at least maybe exploring patent protection, you could certainly first evaluate the patentability. And if that patentability is assessed and it's determined that there is patentable subject matter, you work with an attorney to prepare and file that application. You disclose to the Patent Office any other publications, devices, patents that you think relate to it as part of our duty to disclose with the U.S. Patent Office. A patent examiner picks it up, examines your application, and then typically says if it's rejected or if it's allowed. It's common to get one or more rejections in the process. We respond to those rejections, arguing the patentability, and then ultimately get to allowance. In general, it's a couple years, 2 to 3 years for that process to take place. There are ways you can fast track it if the particular innovation has high value, or if it's very important to have a faster track for a particular product or method, for example. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the requirements for patenting your 3D printing related innovation. So the main requirement, we're talking about the utility now, is it first must be in the category of patentable subject matter. And this generally includes any process or method, a machine, manufacture, or a composition of matter, as the U.S. patent law describes it. So in our 3D printing related world, some things to be thinking about when you're innovating, if you're interested in patents. So it could be an improvement to a method or a process of operating the 3D printer. It could be an improvement to a system within the 3D printer. improvements or new materials that are used within the printer and or with or in conjunction with the printer. The actual printer itself, there's been a lot of innovation with that, as you probably are all well aware. Software that's used to direct the 3D printer to print the object, there's certainly innovation with that, and software is patentable. And then lastly, the 3D printed object itself. Again, this might be lend itself more to a design patent protection, but I've certainly written claims in patent applications and obtained patent protection for unique features of the 3D printed object, device, medical device itself. Next slide, please. So other requirements for a utility patent are that it must be new, it's not obvious, and it has some type of use. The use is something that's always most easily satisfied. Typically there's always some use. Novelty also can be easier, and typically the most challenging hurdle that we see when we're prosecuting and we're trying to get the applications through is this non-obviousness requirement. So we'll go to the next slide, please, and talk a little bit more about each of these requirements. So first, novelty means that your innovation as a whole must be new. So if your innovation has already been described in another patent or publication, if it's on the internet, that's going, and it was published before you are filing your patent application, that's going to be a problem. That's going to prevent your invention or your innovation from being novel. However, if the parts are old, a combination of old parts may be new. If the device, as I have here, is old, a method of using the device or method of using the 3D printer, for example, may be new. So a couple things to keep in mind. In most jurisdictions throughout the world, once you disclose your invention or your innovation to the public, so that means any third party that's not under an obligation of confidentiality, you may inadvertently forfeit your patent rights. So if you think you have something that may be patentable, I would definitely recommend to keep it confidential, to not show it to a third party, and to talk to a lawyer, a patent attorney first to see if it's patentable, because you'd hate to publicly disclose it, even in an informal way, and forfeit any patent rights that you may have been obtained or might have been entitled to, excuse me. Okay, next slide, please. The next, this is an example of novelty. So for example, there might be a patent from a third party that discloses the same 3D printed medical device. I do a lot of work with medical devices, and we'll look at the landscape, or we'll look at what else is out there sometimes before we prepare an application. And if it discloses that same medical device and it was invented before the device that's covered, we're trying to cover in the claim of a patent application, this could prevent your claim from being novel. Or in other words, you could get a rejection for novelty. So it has to include every single aspect of your claim, which is what we write in the patent application that defines the metes and bounds of your invention or your innovation. Next slide, please. So related to that, as I mentioned, the next requirement is that your invention must be not obvious in view of what's already out there. So your invention as a whole, if it's obvious to what we call a person having ordinary skill in the art, a person that's familiar with this area of technology, with 3D printing and additive manufacturing, then you may be prevented from getting a patent. The next slide, please. One common example is that in the mechanical world, you've got Velcro or you've got a button in a whole configuration. If someone substitutes the Velcro strip from the buttonhole and everything else is the same, there's an argument there that it would have been obvious to modify this existing device with a known substitute. So I'm sure you can think of similar types of substitution or interchangeable parts within the 3D printing world. We'd have to stay away from that. But if there's an unexpected function or a result, it may also be non-obvious, in addition to other structural features. Next slide, please. So a couple things. Even if Patenting considerations. If you think that you're working on an innovation right now, or your team is, or your organization is, or you have something that's coming in the future this year, before you're investing in a patent application, it might be a good idea to have a patentability search conducted. We'll conduct the search. We'll look at the patents that are already out there. It'll be, of course, tailored to your proposed invention. And the search results help us understand the scope of the patent protection available, which is helpful, to help you determine if you even want to proceed. And then if we do proceed, it helps the patent drafter craft a claim strategy that's tailored, to your invention in view of these search results. So we kind of have more intelligence that helps us have a more robust patent claim. And one way that we've done this, in a single utility patent application, is we might have a couple different claims that take into consideration those search results. One that's directed to the process, another to the printer using that process or software, and then another to the 3D printed device. Next slide, please. And even if it's ultimately not desired or appropriate to seek patent protection for your innovation, one additional consideration is to think about whether it's worthwhile to have what we call a freedom to operate search conducted. And this is basically, another word for it is a clearance search, to see what else is out there. If you're about to launch a 3D printed product or a 3D printed innovation, you want to make sure before you make that investment, for example, that you're not inadvertently or unknowingly infringing other products or processes that relate to your innovation. So we can do that. We can search what's out there. We know that there's been this increase in filing. There's a lot that's out there in this additive manufacturing sector, certainly in the last 5 years. We'll look at the claims of those issued unexpired patents. We'll analyze them to determine if your innovation could potentially infringe. We might just recommend that you have clearance to operate, clearance to sell this. However, if we do see a potential infringement issue, we can identify that before your product is released, and even potentially help you implement a design around to mitigate any infringement issue. Next slide, please. So a couple things that I've recently worked on, and just a lot of it's in the med device area, but there's been other technologies too, is orthopedic implants, splints and braces, 3D printed spinal fusion cages. I've also worked on 3D printed valves and actuators and regulators and parts of control valve systems, to name a few. So there's certainly not just a lot of filings in the additive manufacturing space, but a lot of issued patents as well. Next slide, please. So this takes us to part 2 of my talk today. And the second part, that it's an area that I really care deeply about. As a woman engineer and then a woman patent lawyer, the numbers are even smaller. And when I say woman here, and in terms of increasing diversity and innovation, I'm really just generally talking about any underrepresented group. But we'll see some of these statistics for women in innovating, and particularly in the patent world, and the numbers are dismal. And so a lot of folks are trying to increase this diversity and innovation for many, many reasons. And I am just happy to be able to have a chance to talk about that today as well. So a couple quick stats, and there's so much out there right now on this, but recent data shows that a woman was cited as a lead inventor on only 7.7% of all the patents filed between 1977 and 2010 in the US. In addition, inventor teams with women represent only 16% of filed patents. So the unequal number of patents that are produced by men and women suggests that fewer women and underrepresented groups in general have the chance to invent. When we leave these innovations unpatented, we have a lost economic value. And we also know that this disparity in patenting can correlate to the disparity in your advancement in the workplace, your salaries, especially when you have circumstances where patents are linked to promotion and salary increases. And that's the case in many, many tech companies. Next slide, please. So the benefits to improving innovation, right? We were trying to create an inclusive culture where innovative ideas and the contributions of all of our employees, including female and diverse employees, are both sought out and clearly valued. We want to fill the pipeline with new inventors and new perspectives. And when we do that, we will have innovation in new areas. We'll have innovation related to women's health issues, to issues that are particularly related to those underrepresented groups. And will bring a greater value to your organization. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? How do we start to improve the diversity and innovation in our organizations? I think one of the first things to do is to think about or complete this self-assessment and try to understand where your organization is within this range. So I've listed here the different areas within the range. We've got pre-aware, aware, align, integrate, and sustain. And pre-aware is when the leaders and the employees are just largely unaware of this gender disparity, or this, it's either gender unrepresented groups disparity within, patenting or within innovation. So we want to move that to being aware. Are you more aware? They're aware of it as a whole, but there aren't really any programs to address the gender disparity. Perhaps your organization is in this aligned category where you're aware of it. You're trying to promote an atmosphere of inclusion and awareness. You've got a couple active programs. You may have numerous active programs. And lastly, in the sustaining category on this spectrum here, you've got many programs, and this is really a critical piece, you're actively tracking the metrics around this issue and communicating your commitment to address this issue externally, and you do that on a regular basis. So I think the first step in how to improving this diversity is innovation is trying to understand where you fall within this spectrum. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the first step is, in any one of these categories, increasing this awareness and internal support. So if the leaders and employees are largely unaware, we want to make sure that we get the leaders and those people in a leadership role, a hiring role, any sort of role where they can have more impact on all of the employees. You want to make sure that they're aware. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's something that's ongoing, regular activity. Step 2, discovering, why is this happening within my organization? Does it relate to how work is distributed? Does it relate to how teams are formed to address a project? Does it relate to how we're hiring? Because we know that when folks have an opportunity to work on important projects that could involve innovation and inventions and patenting, they are oftentimes in a better position to get promoted. But when they're not, and when they don't have those opportunities, then it's this ripple effect. They're often, not able to be promoted. They don't have these opportunities to innovate or to be a part, be an inventor, in an invention, et cetera. So we're looking at the root causes. Why is this happening? If we have a disparity within our organization, what are we doing that might be causing this? Step 3, develop a program. How can we bring these opportunities to those that are looked over? And this is, again, assuming that there are no performance issues. We want to make sure that all of the high-performing folks are given these same opportunities, and then therefore have the same opportunity to be an inventor or to innovate or to be on that big project that's going to have a portfolio of patents, let's say. Develop programs where you can teach others to be an ally. And this is really in the day-to-day work that we're doing. And then lastly, launch and monitor it and track it. It's really important to track that success. How do we do that? One way is regular and inclusive surveys where you're asking employees, you're asking leadership, you're asking everyone, how is this working? How do you feel? Do you feel like you have opportunities? One suggestion is to leave personal information out so that folks are comfortable being honest, and to also have scales to evaluate so that you can start to collect data about how you're monitoring your program. And then again, this goes back up into the awareness, bring this data back up to the leaders within your organization so that we continue to increase awareness on a continuing basis. Next slide, please. So Lastly, we know that society benefits from inventor diversity. We've seen again and again and again. There's one business case after another. When we have diverse teams and we have diverse workplaces and we have diverse inventors, that companies across the board, businesses across the board perform better. They make more money, people feel more engaged, there's less retention, and there's so much to benefit from the diversity within the organizations. This change, though, requires a commitment, and it really starts at the top. If we can get the higher levels of the organization to help with this commitment, it will make the change easier. And lastly, each and every one of us has the power to influence this positive change in terms of increasing this diversity. As an individual in our day-to-day work, on those phone calls, in those meetings, being an ally, not interrupting, sharing the stage with another, we all have the power to influence this change. And if we work together to do that, I really think we can make a difference and increase these numbers so we have a lot more diversity and innovation.